Thank you. So I'm not used to giving lectures in English because I'm a journalist who works in Swedish, so you have to forgive me. But even though I know you are all fluent in English. So the purpose here today is, like Annalisa said, I'm going to tell you some of my work and the ethics and the challenges that I'm dealing with every day, and how science and health reporters work, and also what I want from communicating with scientists. So I hope that will increase our understanding. So I'm actually going to just some quick words about me. I'm a medicine and health reporter at Dagens Nyheter, and I started working there a bit over a year ago, last January. And I previously worked at KI-bladet for 5 years almost, here at KI. And I've also worked at Dagens Medicin and Svenska Dagbladet, for example. And I'm not educated in medicine. I have a degree in journalism and also in peace and conflict because I wanted to be a foreign correspondent, but but it was just a lucky coincidence that I was that I came to KI to work for KI-bladet because that got me interested in medicine and health. And last year, in the beginning of this year, me and my colleague, we got an award from the Swedish Skeptics Association for our reporting. It's called Enlightener of the Year. So I'm very proud of that. So when you think of science and health reporting and medicine and health reporting, you may think of this. Daily drink to beat dementia, vitamin cocktail stops memory loss, or mushrooms beat cancer, or maybe jab as deadly as cancer. That's the HPV vaccine, that's the reporting. Or maybe this, I'm not sure if you can read it, says bacon, ham, and sausages as big as a cancer threat as smoking, WHO to warn. So none of those are great examples. There are some bad health and medicine reporting out there because science is hard, and medicine and health risks to communicate that is really hard also. But there are also some great examples, and of course, as you know, here at KI, so maybe that's not a great example for you, but for the community in all, it's good. So science and medicine reporting can also be great, and because journalists have helped uncover scientific fraud like Paolo Macchiarini, but also Andrew Wakefield, the man who got stripped of his medical license because he said that he published an article that linked the NPR vaccine to autism, and even though it's been debunked a lot of times, people still believe it. And actually I got an email today from one person that believes it. So. But not everything is that dramatic, because just everyday, ordinary day, stuff to stuff, it's not that dramatic, but it still helps people understand complex science stories and make better choices. These are two of my actually favorite science and medicine writers. Ed Yong, he writes for The Atlantic. Here he has, no, we can't say whether cancer is mostly based on mostly bad luck. It was a paper, I think, in Science a couple of weeks ago or months ago. And also Julia Belus of Vox, and she has gone through, should you walk or run for exercise? Here's what the science says. So those are two really great communicators in medicine and health. But to be great, you need more time than you think, and you most probably need to be specialized just in science and health reporting, because this is a different type of reporting than other journalism reporting. But today, most news outlets no longer have specialized reporters on their editorial staff, so that's a problem. But I'm quite fortunate because Dagens Nyheter, we have two on the science team, me and my colleague Maria Gunther. She's the science editor and I'm a medicine reporter. But we also have a lot of other specialized reporters reporting on the environment or the military or crime. So I don't think you can read this, but this is usually how the media handles news stories. On the one side, we have So we'll be talking to Dr. Jenkins of the National Institute of Health about the results of his 3-year study. And then for a different take, we'll just talk to Roger here, who I understand has reached the opposite conclusion just by sitting on his couch and speculating. And this is actually how we handle it a lot of times today, because journalism is based on conflict. You want one person on the one side to take one view and one on the other side to take an opposing view. But when it comes to science and medicine, this is the wrong approach. And actually, the results can be quite problematic, and it can be false balance. And it's a problem when we take someone who has a degree and who is educated and knows what he's talking about, has published articles, and then someone who has been Googling a lot. And that's a problem, because the audience or the readers, they will think they know the same, or that what they say matters as much as the other one. And this happens a lot more if the journalist isn't specialized in medicine or science, because we know, as specialized reporters, we know how to do this, how not to do it. Actually, a couple of weeks ago, the Swedish public radio Studio 1 they let an infectious diseases doctor discuss vaccines with an anti-vaccine mother, so it happens in Sweden also. And the reason that this happens is just because there are some fundamental differences between science on the one side and journalists on the other side. And science, as all of you know, of course, it takes time. It doesn't have any answers. If they have answers, they're not that sure. We think, they build on previous research, and it's complex. You can't give clear-cut answers. And the more certain you are, the more you reach consensus, and the more researchers think something, the more sure it is, and you want to repeat the results. But journalists on the other side is fast. It's much faster than you think, and it simplifies a lot. And we want simple answers, and we want them fast, and we want them now or yesterday, and we want them to be definite. And we also want to have the conflict. We want one opinion versus another. And we also want new information, so repeated results, that's not interesting for journalists. But, so where do I stand in this? Because I'm a medicine journalist, and I often report on scientific studies. And my loyalty, of course, is with the readers. And because of that, and the divide between science and journalists, I often find myself in conflict, and those conflicts are regarding ethics. Maybe there's a scientist that thinks that I should write something about a study they have published that I don't think is clinically relevant for the readers, and maybe there's an editor who thinks I should report on science, some bad science. So this is me. And or at least that's my editor see me, because my most usually mentioned, my word that I use a lot at Dagens Nyheter is no, you shouldn't do this, or no, we shouldn't do that. No, I'm not going to do that. But it's not because I want to keep stuff from people or keep information from people. It's because of ethical considerations and journalistic integrity. And so when people want me to write things, it could be scientists or PR people or editors, or when they pitch me a news story, I often shoot them down. And that's because scientists are really bad at spotting news, and journalists and editors are quite bad at spotting bad science. So I have to balance that all day. And when I balance that, I have some ethical guidelines that takes me through this, how I'm thinking when I'm deciding if I'm going to write a news story. And the first is, what does the average reader understand? I used to work for Dagens Medicin, which the readers are doctors and nurses, and they're experts, and they know more than me. And then I can use words like double-blind or RCT or nocebo or something like that. But now I work for a daily newspaper, so my readers are all kinds of people. Some are you, and some are a lot less educated. And so I have to think, how much do they understand? What can I tell them? And what do I have to explain? And that's the science. The average readers are lot less science savvy than you think. So I have to explain words like double-blind, and I have to explain words like, they don't even know placebo sometimes, or how science works. So I have to explain that, and or randomized. And then I have to think about, is this relevant or interesting? Is this something they will find interesting? Because otherwise no one will read it. My editors, they can print it because they listen to me, but no one will read it, so why is it out there? And that, what's relevant and interesting for a scientist could be something that's completely different from what an editor thinks is interesting. And so sometimes I have to balance it, because something is important, but maybe it's not that interesting. But then that's my job, to make it interesting. And then the next thing is, what can't we say? What can't we say from a study? What are the limitations? Because the readers, they don't know how to. Some of my readers, they don't know if this is a study on mice. They think, oh, it applies to people automatically, so I have to explain to them, this doesn't apply to people. It could be, but we don't know yet. We don't know that. This is epidemiological study, so we can't say anything about causal effect. And then I have to simplify, because strange words, or words that sound strange, but not for you, but for the readers, it's hard for them to understand it, and I'd rather simplify too much. But it's a delicate balance, but rather they feel smart and understand something than they don't understand anything at all and feel dumb because then they won't read it. And this is an important part. Don't call it a cure if it isn't a cure, because sometimes people are desperate out there. They want a cure. They are sick and they want to be cured. And maybe there's a new study with maybe some mechanism, or maybe a new drug, and they think, oh, so finally something happens, and they call me and they want to talk about it, and they want this new medicine. So I don't want to give people false hope. So that's actually a conflict I have with some of my editors, because I don't want them to put the word cure in a headline if it isn't a cure. And I can't exaggerate too much, and that's also connecting to this, because it will give people false hope, and they feel fooled. And if I exaggerate too much, they won't trust me next time. So don't cry wolf. But also I don't want to scare them. And this is a delicate task, actually, because when I started working at Dagens Nyheter last year in January, it was this Zika outbreak in Brazil, and there were a lot of babies born with really small heads, and people were quite scared. And so I had to keep my head cold and I'm really interested in infectious diseases because, and this was a new infectious disease, even though the virus had been along for 50 or so years, but we've never seen those babies with microcephaly before. And people wanted to know everything. Could it come here? Could it be something else? And I have to keep keep calm and say, okay, this isn't, we don't know yet, but everything points to the virus. It won't come here because it's spread by mosquitoes, but so don't be alarmed, but still this is a concern for the people who live in Brazil or for the international community, of course, but it won't affect your personal health if you don't live in Brazil. And so that was quite a delicate, that was a new test for me when I started, because I didn't know how much do my readers understand. So I was learning by trying almost. And I learned a lot during those weeks or months when people really wanted to know everything about Zika. And the last line here is, don't fall too deep for the human touch. That is quite hard because journalists want to have a human touch, human interest story, because we want to illustrate it with a case, with someone who has a disease or someone who has been helped by a new drug. But it's sometimes it feels like anecdotal evidence, and I try not to use them, but still I have to, because otherwise maybe some people won't read it or listen to me. But there's also a second problem. A lot of people email me with because they have a disease, and they want me to write about it. And a lot of people that write to me say they have a disease that's called chronic Lyme disease, and that's not a disease that's actually acknowledged by the scientific community. So of course they are suffering, and I'm sure they want something to be done, but they aren't sick from that disease. So it would be responsible for me to write about it. And actually, there's also a lot of people who think they've gotten a disease from a vaccine or from a drug, even though there's no evidence of that, and the HPV vaccine especially. So people write to me and said, my daughter is sick, and she took the HPV vaccine and she got sick. And of course I feel for her because her daughter is sick, but the science isn't there, so I couldn't write about her. And that's quite hard to communicate with that person and say, I'm sorry, I feel for you, but I can't write about this, because then they think I'm just trying not to write. But I'm going big pharma's errands. They think I'm bought by big pharma in a conspiracy. And actually, we have to take responsibility for what we write, because in Denmark there were a lot of irresponsible reporting on the HPV vaccine. So before that report on possible side effects and girls have gotten sick. And it led to a massive investigation done by the European Medicine Agency, and they found no evidence of this whatsoever. So they said the vaccine is safe. But in Denmark, the reporting led to a massive drop in vaccination rates. So I think they halved. I think about 50 or 60% of the girls before was vaccinated, and now there's 25%. And there's been a lot of irresponsible reporting on the HPV vaccine, sometimes in Sweden also, but it hasn't fortunately led to low rates. And sometimes it's also been great HPV vaccine reporting. A couple of days ago, Aktuelt had some good reporting on this. And sometimes when you get a study, sometimes when I come to work in the morning, there's been a new story from another magazine, maybe a new study has been published, and they say, could you write a comment to this? And a couple of months ago, there was a study that said milk could shorten your life. So when I came into the office, the headline on the website said "Milk shortens your life." So the first thing I said, okay, could. So you have to change that. But then I read the story, I read the report, and then I wrote my comment. And so this is in Swedish, so I'm going to translate this for you who don't speak Swedish. Too soon to determine that milk is dangerous, because I read the previous meta-analysis, and no meta-analysis said that milk is dangerous for us. But my opponent or counterpart at Svenska Dagbladet said, time to take all these alarms from milk, these studies seriously. So I'm not saying that I did it right or he did it wrong, but it was an observational study in what one study. So, and a lot of people drink milk, and you don't want to frighten them. And all the other evidence pointed in one direction, and then this one study who's pointing in that direction. So what should I do? And of course, I can't tell my readers to, oh, you should stop drink milk or you should drink milk. But I said, the science says, because I can't give medical advice, but I said the science says, the other science says, milk isn't dangerous, but maybe you should think about how much you drink or what you do differently. And that comes, that leads me into my next slide, and that means trust goes both ways. It means that we have to trust each other, because journalists are dependent on scientists, and scientists are dependent on journalists to report on their findings. But scientists also have responsibility, because we trust you. We trust what you say to us. And my colleague Maria Gunther, she always has to remind people that just because a scientist says it, it doesn't mean it's true. You have to check it up. But journalists think that scientists say the absolute truth, and they say something that they're respected, and we think that you would never lie to us, or you would never exaggerate or something. But that's why you also have a responsibility in when communicating with a journalist. Don't tell us something that can't be concluded from a study, or what's not consensus. If it's your opinion, say this is just my opinion. And another thing is, I'm the expert on writing. Scientist is the expert, and you want to be an expert and respected in your field. We also want to be respected in our field. We know what words to use, and we know how to write a story. Of course, you can have some opinions, and I try to listen to the opinions of the scientists when I communicate on a story, but in the end, I'm the one who decides. And so you're the expert, and we will never know as much as you, so please explain to us if we haven't read the study, because we probably haven't read the study. Science journalists will have read the study, because we have to, but most journalists have a few minutes to prepare. And maybe they want an article in an hour, so they just, okay, who can I call? And then they're going to read the study. It's really hard to, a lot of journalists don't understand how to read a scientific study also. So just explain it to us and tell us what we can draw and what we can't draw, what conclusions we can draw. And while we're on the topic, we talked about this before, Karin, the headlines. No one is ever happy with the headlines as a scientist, but journalists aren't that happy either, because a compromise is best, of course, but the editors they think like journalists, and scientists think like scientists, and never shall they two meet, because it's really hard to do a great headline. But if it's wrong, you should never exaggerate, and you shouldn't call something a cure. And you can compromise from both lines, but it will never be perfect. And as a journalist, I suggest a headline, but I usually never write it myself. And actually, the last here is we have to be able to trust peer-reviewed articles and press releases from universities, because today there's actually some scientists and universities are becoming much more aggressive in their media outreach, because you get if you get media attention, maybe you can get more grant money or something like that. And so some press releases never mention the research was done on mice, or that there's a really long way until there's a new drug or medicine available to the public. So you also have a responsibility to see that the science is right there, right. And actually, this was published just, I think, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. This was all over international media, but maybe not as much in Sweden. I think Aftonbladet published something like that, because this was an observational study. It was published in Stroke, so it's a peer-reviewed magazine. And it said that if you drink diet soda, you're more likely to develop Alzheimer's or stroke. And it ticks all the boxes for a great news story, because it's unexpected, because we believe diet soda is healthy, and a lot of people are affected by this, and there are two quite scary diseases or health issues, and it was published. So, right, it was great. But actually, and a lot of this has the word links, so it doesn't say it causes, but a lot of the headlines was diet soda causes stroke or dementia or Alzheimer's, they even said. But actually, I don't feel like the fault is with the journalist here, because the study was published, and it's been highly discredited afterwards. It was there were some results that wasn't statistically significant, and even though the researchers, they said we can't draw too many big conclusions on that, they also said you should stop drinking diet soda because it's not healthy. But then they said we don't really know, because it's not causality, it's just it's a correlation. And also they didn't adjust for multiple comparisons and BMI. And since I'm not a scientist, I'm not sure about that, but they said that this is p-hacking. So nothing in the study is significant, statistically significant. And the peer reviewers should have caught that. And maybe they shouldn't have published it. So we're only as good as the published article or the study. But sometimes, of course, even though there's a good study, the headlines maybe isn't that great. That full-fat dairy stuff, cheese, yogurt, and so on, isn't bad for you, study finds. It was a meta-analysis, and it found that probably full-fat dairy isn't as big a heart risk as you think. And people love to hear this, especially in Sweden, where a lot of people love LCHF, the diet. But it also was financed by dairy groups. And so you have to be responsible in how you talk about it and what you say, because people will take your advice. And sometimes the headline isn't so great. But even though the headline is great, so training your brain so that you don't need reading glasses. Could you do that? Couldn't you do that? But there are also, you shouldn't judge an article by its headline, because there's actually a site that's called Health News Review, who evaluates news stories about health, and they gave it full rating because it was great, even though the headline wasn't great. So even though headlines aren't that great, you still can. If you read it, you will understand, and it can still be great reporting. And so I have few tips on when to contact, when in contact with journalists. And you should email. Email, please don't call, because we don't have the time for that. We get 200 emails every day. And summarize, keep it as short, as simple, sweet as possible, and be concrete and offer exclusivity, because then the magazine will be so much more happy if we can report on something before others. And we have a lot of stuff to do, so keep it short again. And contact us a long time before, not that long of course, but before, and not the day before, because we probably won't have time then. And be nice. That's and if you have, you can also of course contact us for if we've done something wrong or something is bad and badly written, or we should correct something. But read the article. And this is one of my favorite tweets by Ed Young, the science journalist I was talking about. Forgive for the cursing, but sing like no one is listening, love like you've never been hurt, dance like nobody's watching, read the fucking article. So read the article, because otherwise we will get really defensive and really irritated and won't listen to you. So, but we of course want to do the best reporting we can, but we have to trust each other and we have to communicate better with that. So thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to talking to a lot of you afterwards. Thank you.